Summon Night games were some of my favourites on the Game Boy Advance, so upon learning that the DS got an entry as well, I was eager to try it out for myself to see how it would stack up against the others. Although it is slightly different from those that came before it, Twin Age offers a pretty respectable take on the series, which sadly doesn't get talked about as much as the others. By far the most impressive part of it is its story, that sees you having the option of choosing from one of two different characters at the beginning, with them both having a unique story to tell. Now at its core, it's an action RPG that takes full advantage of the unique inputs that the DS brings to the table, and delivers something completely different than what had been seen in the series past. The combat is really fast paced and entirely controlled using the stylus, that sees you having to tap on enemies to attack, draw paths to move characters and activate skills or items through the intuitive menu system. This streamlined approach makes each fight feel fluid and accessible, while still offering enough depth for those looking for a bit of challenge. Now one thing that soon becomes one of the most important aspects of the game is the ability to switch between your characters on the fly, with one excelling at hand-to-hand combat and the other being far more proficient in magic, allowing you to easily adapt to the various enemy types and combat scenarios that pop up. On top of this, you can also recruit and customize various party members, including something known as summon beasts, which come along with elemental attacks or buffs that soon become essential to making your way through to the end. With its surprisingly deep story, intriguing mechanics and diverse world to explore, Twin Age ends up being a game you owe to yourself to try out. Blood of Bahamut is yet another game that never made its way outside of Japan, but it's now fully playable thanks to a translation, and when I came across it, it was a huge surprise, as it's a game that seems to take inspiration from the likes of Shadow of the Colossus and blends it with the many RPG elements that veterans will be accustomed to. Now the story tells the legend of a god who gave birth to gigantic behemoths and covered the earth in an unrelenting mist that slowly robbed humans of their life force. As a result, the remnants of humanity made it their goal to battle and defeat the larger-than-life monstrosities that now roam the world freely, and this is where the journey begins. The entire adventure is split up into a selection of missions that give you one of several different objectives to complete. These usually entail heading to a specific point on the map, surviving for a set amount of time, or defeating the behemoth entirely, and this is where the battle system comes into full swing. Almost haunting the background of each location is one of these monsters that will constantly try to attack you by throwing rocks or taking swings with its weapon, and in the meantime the ground is filled with lesser enemies that pose a more immediate threat, and juggling between the two is what really helps the combat come alive. Thankfully, your character has special abilities that can be unlocked and upgraded by using materials found by completing stages, as well as basic melee or ranged attacks for when those skills are on cooldown. After spending quite some time playing it, Blood of Bahamut has easily become one of my favourite games on the DS. The DS was easily one of the best handhelds to own when it came to RPGs, with a huge selection of adventures to undertake, but one that flew well under the radar was From the Abyss. It's essentially a dungeon crawler that takes place in a world that's enjoyed centuries of peace thanks to a dimensional gate that was built to seal away evil. Of course, over time it gradually weakened, and now the same monsters that once roamed the earth are free once again, and this is where the player comes in. You get to choose from a few different character models and then have to answer a series of questions that determine your stats before setting out. And like most dungeon crawlers, there's not too much of a focus on the story, instead the gameplay is the main selling point. And this is where From the Abyss truly shines. You get to go through each level and have to keep the hordes of monsters at bay, with a surprisingly generous amount of different weapons that allow you to experiment with various playstyles, from swords and spears to axes and bows. They all come along with their own unique abilities, as well as having the option to wield magic, and as you level up, you'll be given points that can be spent on one of 6 different stats that determine your proficiency within the world, essentially allowing you to build any type of character that you want. Now a nice addition to the game is the inclusion of co-op, and if you're lucky enough to come across someone who's got a copy of the game, or simply set it up through an emulator to play it online, you're able to tackle the dungeons together, and arguably this is where the game is at its best. Even though it's not perfect, From the Abyss ends up being a really solid action RPG that's worthy of a spot in anyone's DS collection. The original Final Fantasy Chronicles on the GameCube never really managed to hit the ground running, despite having some pretty great ideas under its belt. This was mainly due to the somewhat absurd requirement of needing several pieces of hardware to experience the game at its best, and no doubt many players missed out because of it. This is where its successor Ring of Fates comes into the fray, and managed to alleviate many of the issues that were present in the original, and would go on to become one of the most enjoyable action RPGs on the DS. One of the first things that struck me with the game is for sure there's still a great emphasis upon multiplayer, but its story is surprisingly deep and quite heavy, with equal amounts of voice acting and FMV cutscenes thrown in for good measure, allowing you to enjoy the experience either alone or with friends. On the gameplay front, this is where Ring of Fates was an even bigger improvement, and dropped the original's approach that saw you having to look after a crystal that you always had to keep by your side, for a much more simple real-time combat system. It comes along with 4 different classes that sees you getting to choose from warrior, mage, archer or support that naturally all have their own advantages and abilities that are not only useful in each fight but also with the many puzzles found throughout the environment. As you would expect, crafting is at the centre of the game, and this is how you'll be building new weapons and types of armour that make each run into the dungeons worthwhile. With its just over 12-hour campaign, plenty of unlockables and secrets to discover, Ring of Fates is definitely worth seeking out, especially for fans of the series who are looking for something a bit different. Ever since being introduced to the series with PSO on the Dreamcast, this franchise has soon become one of my favourite RPGs, and upon hearing a version of the game would be hitting the DS, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it, and when it released it really didn't disappoint, with the game requiring you to create a character from scratch and choose from various jobs and races that all have their own various pros and cons depending on your approach to the gameplay. Now the game is comprised of 8 different worlds or maps to visit throughout the adventure that are basically different biomes that offer various types of environments to explore. From snowy mountaintops to the scorching heat of the desert, there's plenty of diversity when it comes to the locations, and of course the same can be said for the enemies that reside there. They tend to be animal-like in nature, such as bulls, gorillas and birds, but there's also a range of mechanical enemies to contend with as well. Thankfully, you've got a range of skills and attacks to help keep them at bay, and this is where something known as your mag comes into play. Mags are essentially small robotic creatures that will follow you around, and you get to feed them anything from your inventory, making their stats increase as well as those of your characters. What's great about these mags is that depending on what you feed them and how you increase their stats, it changes their appearance and gives your character a unique look. The main draw of the game though is the online play that is still active in small pockets to this day, so if you've never heard of this game, there's still plenty of people keeping it alive, which are always looking to increase their numbers, so if you find it on the cheap, it's well worth giving a go if you like the look of it. Soma was a Japanese exclusive that came from the same minds that brought us the likes of Xenoblade. Upon booting it up, you're presented with a number of options right away that determine the course of your quest. You'll get to choose your character's name, appearance, job class, weapon proficiency and starting stats, and are introduced to a world where mysterious entities known as visitors are invading. You play as one of 7 members of an organisation and are tasked with looking into one of these incidents on your very first mission. From the straightforward start, the plot develops, and sooner or later you'll find yourself completely engrossed in a thrilling adventure with a few unexpected twists and outcomes. Gameplay wise, everything is presented in real time, from exploring the vast world to seamlessly entering battle, and is here where the game is at its best. The face buttons can be assigned to an ability, with the shoulder buttons quickly switching between the members in your party. Now a wide range of skills are at your fingertips, and throughout the course of the game you'll be learning a bucket load that all have a role to play when it comes to the various encounters you'll come across, and this is no more apparent than when it comes to the bosses. Each of them pose a real threat and demand a keen understanding of the mechanics in play to overcome, but never to the point of pure despair, as if you're prepared and ready to take them on, you'll never really find yourself in a bind. Lasting just over 40 hours, the game is certainly generous when it comes to its content, and with plenty of side quests to help pad out the experience as well. It's a game that you can easily find yourself becoming lost in and losing hours upon hours to as a result, and thanks to a full English translation, it's now easier than ever to jump into this forgotten classic and see the humble beginnings of what would eventually evolve into the critically acclaimed Xenoblade series. Lunar Knights is the spiritual successor to an often overlooked series of games known as Boktai that appeared on the Game Boy Advance, and what set these games apart from others was mechanic tied to actual sunlight in the real world, which was made possible thanks to a solar sensor that was built into each cartridge. It allowed you to harness the power of the sun and defeat various enemies like vampires through 3 incredible adventures. Sadly though, due to the games being limited by a real world environment, they never got the recognition they deserved. But Lunar Knights ditches this gimmick and instead introduces a climate system that's entirely determined by the game itself. This time around you take up the fight as 2 different characters. You've got Aaron, a young gunslinger who wields the power of the sun, and Lucian, a mysterious swordsman who fights with the power of darkness. Using the abilities of both is your path to victory, with the adventure being split up into various dungeons the player must explore and conquer. As the 2 heroes hack and blast their way through enemies on the bottom screen, the top will display the current weather, which has the potential to affect the terrain you come across in each dungeon. For example, if you can't cross a fallen path, you can make it rain and flood the area and elevate the platform back to where it once was. Or if there's a frozen block hindering your way forward, you can make it sunny and watch it melt before your eyes. As you would guess, this opens up untold amounts of different scenarios and ends up being a really neat inclusion that feels far more intuitive, with not having to rely on the real weather outside. Ultimately, if you can find it for a good price or get hold of it through other means, then Lunar Knights is definitely worth giving a spin. Lufia, The Curse of the Sinistrals is essentially a remake of the second entry in the series. The narrative opens up with a godlike figure going by the name of Gades warning that the end of the world is near and that all life will soon be destroyed. In order to defeat him, the player steps into the role of Maxim, a young man who enjoys combat, and so begins the journey. Now jumping into the gameplay, this is where a lot of the changes were made to the formula that made up the original. Gone were the slow turn-based battles and a real-time system instead took its place, complete with special moves, character switching on the fly and different spells to get used to. At first it seems to be little more than a standard hack and slasher, but as you add additional characters to your group it develops into something much more. You get to quickly switch the party member you're using by tapping a character portrait on the screen, and the best thing about it is that if you time it just right, you can end up performing combos that keep the damage coming. Now just like many of the entries that came before it, dungeons play a huge role in the game and are packed full of puzzles to figure out, and with the Curse of the Sinistrals, this aspect is turned up to 11. But don't get turned off, because while being thought-provoking and encouraging the use of each party member's skills, the puzzles never get overbearing to the point where you want to throw your console out of the window. Unfortunately, the remake doesn't get the same runtime as the original and can be completed rather quickly when compared to it, but thankfully there's a new game plus option that provides even more story to go through, as well as a new ending to incentivize a second playthrough. So whether you're a nostalgic fan or new to the series, it offers an unbeatable experience that just shouldn't be passed up. Ever since its humble beginnings on the PS2, the Kingdom Hearts series has gone on to become one of the more popular RPG franchises, with a number of both mainline games and spin-offs that have spanned a whole host of different consoles. 358 over 2 days may not be a numbered entry, but it's just as important to the overall story, and if you haven't played any of the other games it'll likely not make a lick of sense. It sees you taking up the role of Roxas, and follows his time spent within Organization 13, as you undertake a variety of different missions and slowly discover the sinister and dark secrets of the group. Now in terms of gameplay, this was the first time that the real Kingdom Hearts formula found its way to a handheld. Sure, you had Chain of Memories on the Game Boy Advance, but 358 over 2 days brought the signature real-time combat from the originals to the DS. You've got a wealth of different attacks to perform, from the usual swings of your sword to various types of magic, and as you progress you'll slowly begin to learn new abilities through the use of something known as the panel system. Each new attack, magical spell, weapon upgrade is placed in a series of open squares, allowing you to customize your characters in any way you like. However, you've only got a limited amount of space, and some items require more than one square to fit. As you progress through the missions, you'll unlock new panels, but you'll always need to carefully plan what you want to equip and what you don't in order to maximize the potential of your party. With nearly 100 missions to complete, as well as plenty of bonus challenges to keep you busy as well, 358 over 2 days ends up being one of the finest examples of an action RPG on the DS. Solatorobo is one of, if not the most creative and charming RPGs that you'll find on the DS. It's all about a hunter named Red who lives in the sky with his trusty robot and takes on jobs to help the population of the various flying islands prosper. It shares a lot in common with Tale Concerto on the PS1, and at points it feels like a spiritual successor, but it still manages to carve out its own path and create something incredibly special. At the center of the gameplay is the concept of lifting and throwing, which plays into just about everything that you'll be doing throughout the game. May that be solving puzzles or taking on one of the many different battles, this simple mechanic is beholden to a gauge that requires you to tap frantically in order to pick things up. It's pretty much the main thing you'll be doing in the first half of the game, until it opens up to offer more ways to interact with the world and enemies through one of the various upgrades that you'll come across. This is where the RPG elements come into play, where you'll be leveling up and increasing one of the many attributes that dictate your effectiveness within the world. May that be your strength, speed or defense, they all have a role to play. And what helps break the game up, however, are the several genres that are thrown into the mix as well. From short flying sections to a huge emphasis upon platforming, it ends up feeling like a perfect blend, where you never quite know what the game is going to throw at you next, and as a result it'll keep you on your toes throughout your playthrough. Overall, Solatorobo is simply one of the best games that you'll find on the DS that has sadly been forgotten by the larger gaming community as a whole. This game is worth the time of anyone who cares to check it out, and it'll no doubt leave a lasting impression on those who do. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos, and you can also follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Road Rage, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Affinium Mind, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.